Welcome to TOCHI Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The night was unkind. Rain lashed against the dusty pavement like a punishment from the sky, soaking through Zikora's already threadbare wrapper and the second-hand baby carrier strapped to her chest. The wind carried with it a cruel cold, cutting through the evening air like a blade. Zikora sat crouched beneath a rusted kiosk near a shopping complex in Abuja, her trembling arms wrapped around her twin babies, who whimpered weakly against her chest. One of them, the smaller of the two, had stopped crying completely, his tiny breaths shallow and quick. Her lips trembled not from the cold alone, but from the crushing weight of hopelessness. A tattered umbrella, gifted by a kind street vendor days ago, had finally given up and lay broken at her side. Cars zoomed past without pause, their headlights casting fleeting shadows across her figure like she didn't exist. She gently rocked the children, whispering lullabies she barely remembered from her own mother, the words drowning in the roar of the downpour. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, but what terrified her more was that her children, barely 3 months old, hadn't had proper food all day. She had begged with dignity, but Abuja had no time for dignity in the rain. Zikora's mind wandered to her mother's last moments, how she lay coughing on a mat, her lips blistered, her breath heavy with defeat. Amarachi had once been vibrant, a teacher whose classroom echoed with joy. But after Zikora was born, life had dragged her through the gutters of rejection and despair. Amarachi never revealed who Zikora's father was, only that he was powerful, ambitious, and cold. He made a choice, her mother whispered once, and it wasn't us. That was all. Now, with her mother gone and no name to claim, Zikora's life had become a cycle of fleeing landlords, begging for bread, and avoiding men who saw desperation as an invitation. She didn't know what kept her going. Pride, maybe, or the belief that one day someone would notice her pain. But tonight felt like the end. She had wrapped one baby's feet in a nylon bag to keep them dry, and the other's body was pressed tightly against her heart. Her chest ached from holding them too close for too long. If it weren't for them, she wouldn't have survived this long. But she had no one left. No phone. No shelter. No hope. Just as her thoughts dimmed into despair, a pair of headlights slowed. It was unusual. No car ever slowed here. Her body tensed, eyes narrowing beneath the shadows of the rain. Rich men didn't stop for beggars, unless they had something dark in mind. She instinctively tightened her grip on the babies. A black SUV came to a halt, sleek and imposing. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened. An umbrella emerged, followed by a man stepping out into the rain without hesitation. Tall, well-dressed, and confident, he looked out of place on that flooded street. His eyes locked with hers, and he frowned, not with disgust or fear, but with confusion, recognition. He took another step forward, ignoring the protests of someone yelling from the car. Zikora flinched. Her body told her to run, but her legs had no strength left. And before she could process anything else, he was standing before her, quietly taking off his jacket and covering her and the twins without a word. That moment, the warmth of dry fabric, the gaze that didn't look through her, felt like a crack in the wall of her suffering. Damilola had seen many things on his discreet night drives through the city. Boys sniffing glue under flyovers, hawkers running from task force raids, children sleeping on cardboard. But nothing gripped his soul quite like the image of the woman huddled in the rain. Her face, haunted but proud. Her arms, shielding twin babies from a world that had clearly failed her. He didn't understand why he stopped. Maybe it was impulse. Maybe it was instinct. Or maybe something deeper. From the moment he laid eyes on her, a memory began to throb in his chest, an echo of something his late mother once whispered. One day, you'll meet someone whose eyes make you remember where we started. That night, Damilola remembered her words. As he stepped out of the car, his security detail was furious. They had tried to stop him. This was dangerous, reckless. But he had silenced them with a glare. For once, he didn't care about protocol. This wasn't about power or image. This was about a stranger in the rain who didn't beg him for help, but whose silence screamed louder than any protest could. The closer he got, the more unsettling it became. She looked young, maybe mid-20s. Her clothes clung to her skin, soaked and torn. Her babies barely moved. Her lips trembled, but her eyes didn't plead. That shook him most. Damilola had grown up seeing people bow before him, praise him, pretend to love him because of his surname. But she didn't flinch, didn't grovel. Her eyes just said, "Help or don't. I'm used to being forgotten." He took off his jacket and gently laid it over her shoulders. She flinched, pulling her babies closer, unsure of his intentions. He knelt beside her, trying to meet her eyes. "You're not safe here," he said softly. "Let me help you. You and your children." She didn't speak. She just stared. Slowly she whispered, "They haven't eaten." Her voice cracked. Damilola reached into his car for a food pack he had picked up earlier and handed it to her. She took it, her fingers trembling. As she fed her babies mashed yam from her trembling fingers, he stood there in silence. For the first time in a long while, Damilola, son of the most powerful man in the country, felt utterly powerless. Eventually, she tried to stand, her knees buckling. Damilola caught her instinctively. Her body was lighter than he expected, fragile, like a person who had given everything to survive. "Please, let me take you somewhere safe," he said again. "Just tonight." She looked at him long and hard, searching his face for deceit. Then, with a small nod, she said, "If I go missing, no one will look for me. I'm all they have." Her words pierced his chest like a knife. As he helped her into the back seat, cradling the weaker twin himself, his driver stared at him like he had lost his mind. But Damilola wasn't listening. He was consumed by a question he couldn't shake. Why did her eyes feel like home? The apartment Damilola took her to was one of his quiet refuges, away from the villa, from cameras, from expectations. It wasn't lavish by presidential standards, but it was warm, dry, and safe. As the doors closed behind them, Zecora stood frozen in the middle of the room, unsure whether to run or drop to her knees. Her eyes darted across the room, studying the soft lighting, clean couches, and framed photos on the wall. A different world. Damilola motioned toward the guest room, where a warm blanket and a heater awaited. "You can rest here." "I'll stay out here," he offered, pointing to the living room. She hesitated. Her babies were asleep in her arms now, their tiny chests rising with newfound peace. Slowly, she walked into the room and shut the door halfway, not fully trusting, but too tired to resist. She placed her babies on the bed and collapsed beside them, her eyes wide open in the dark. Her mind raced. Who was this man? Why was he helping her? And why did something about his face feel strange, familiar? Meanwhile, Damilola sat on the edge of his couch, unable to rest. He stared at the door, wondering if he had just done something brilliant or dangerous. His phone buzzed, his father's chief of staff. He ignored it. He scrolled through messages from aides asking where he was, but none mattered. What mattered was that his heart wouldn't calm. He remembered the way she looked at him, like she didn't trust him, like she didn't need his help, yet somehow something in her silence had reached into him. He remembered his mother's stories, how she once told him of a woman who saved the president's life when he was younger and broke. A woman whose name she never mentioned, but whose gift, a handmade necklace, she once showed him. It had a distinct pattern, carved like a river with two small stones embedded, twins. And tonight, Zecora wore that exact necklace. He hadn't dared to ask her yet. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it was madness. But Damilola felt something shift in him. This wasn't just a rescue. It was a thread tied to a past he didn't fully understand. And as the rain finally stopped and silence filled the air, one thing was certain. This was only the beginning. In the dusty streets of Onitsha 26 years ago, Amarachi was known as the woman with a heart too big and a smile too sincere. She was a schoolteacher, passionate about molding young minds despite barely earning enough to survive. She fell in love with a man who used to stop by her classroom to donate books and share political pamphlets, Chaik Uma. Back then he was a charismatic, ambitious man who claimed he wanted to clean up Nigeria. He wasn't rich, but he was driven, and Amarachi, with all her quiet dreams, believed him. They would talk under mango trees, hold hands in secret, and share the kind of laughter only people with nothing to hide could afford. But things changed the moment she told him she was pregnant. His voice turned cold, his hands stopped reaching for hers, and his promises dried up like morning dew in the heat of politics. Amarachi thought it was fear, that he just needed time. But time passed, and he never came back. All she was left with was a swollen belly, a broken heart, and a memory that grew heavier with every passing month. After Chaik disappeared, Amarachi tried everything. She wrote letters, most went unanswered. She asked friends, knocked on doors, even waited outside his campaign meetings. But power was already changing him. He became untouchable, surrounded by men in black suits and faces without smiles. One day, she finally caught him outside a radio station and begged him to talk. She told him she wasn't asking for money, just acknowledgement, just a future for the child they created. He looked at her, dead in the eyes, and whispered, "I have to choose the country now. You don't exist anymore." With that, he got into his car and vanished for good. That day, something inside Amarachi died. Her world crumbled, not just because he abandoned her, but because he did it with ease. She lost her teaching job due to gossip, and her family disowned her for bringing shame. She ended up in a slum, surrounded by drug addicts and prostitutes, where nobody asked questions and nobody cared if you were once loved. Still, she raised Zecora with everything she had left. She told her daughter bedtime stories about queens and warriors, but never about her father. Amarachi's silence on the matter was a shield, meant to protect Zecora from knowing how cruel love could be. When Zecora was 5, Amarachi fell ill, likely from untreated infections and stress. There were no hospitals willing to treat her without money, and no politician knocking on her door. In her final days, she pulled Zecora close and whispered, "He's someone powerful. Someone who once said I was his only dream. But he chose power instead of us. Never let power silence your worth." Those words stayed etched in Zecora's heart like a tattoo made with fire. Amarachi died quietly, surrounded by peeling walls and unpaid debts, leaving her daughter with nothing but a name that held no weight and a necklace she once said belonged to a man who forgot where he came from. Zecora's childhood after her mother's death was a silent war. No funeral, no farewell. Just a neighbor who pitied her enough to offer a mat to sleep on for a few nights. At age 7, she learned to beg without looking people in the eye. She learned to smile to get bread and cry to get water. Every day was a lesson in survival, and every night was a lecture in loneliness. She would sit under bridges with other street children, her necklace always tucked safely inside her blouse. When other children asked where her parents were, she said they traveled. It was easier than explaining the truth, that she was the daughter of a ghost mother and a disappearing man. She hated birthdays, not because she didn't have cake, but because it reminded her that time was moving and no one was coming for her. Zecora didn't go to school. She didn't learn in classrooms. She learned from pain, and pain was a thorough teacher. As she grew older, the streets grew crueler. Men would smile too long, touch her too boldly. She once fought off a man who offered her shelter, only to try and rape her. That night, she slept in an abandoned bus with a swollen lip and a knife under her wrapper. By 15, she knew how to run faster than her hunger and lie better than her truth. She worked in market stalls, cleaned houses, sold sachet water, anything to keep going. When she got pregnant, she didn't even know which employer had taken advantage of her, only that he paid her off like trash. But Zecora refused to give up. She carried her twins with pride, despite the whispers and stares. Every kick in her womb reminded her that she was more than a victim. She was a mother now, and mothers don't give up. Even if she had to sleep on concrete, even if she had to beg in the rain, even if no one saw her worth, she would live for them. What hurt the most wasn't the hunger or the cold or even the loneliness. It was knowing that somewhere out there, someone with power and wealth had her blood running through his veins and didn't care. Every billboard with a smiling politician made her stomach turn. Every convoy that passed by, she stared harder than she meant to, wondering if maybe one of them knew. She'd sometimes clutch her necklace at night and pray, not for riches, but for answers. Was her father still alive? Did he remember Amarachi? Did he ever regret leaving? Those thoughts kept her awake, even when exhaustion tried to drown her. And now, sitting in this strange man's warm apartment, wrapped in blankets her body didn't earn, watching her children finally sleep in comfort, Zecora found herself wondering, could the past ever truly stay buried? At Asa Rock Villa, President Sheikh Uma stood in a room full of mirrors, but could barely recognize the man staring back. Power had a way of reshaping people, of replacing the human inside with something colder, sharper, more dangerous. He had started out with dreams of justice, change, and national rebirth. But the road to the top was lined with compromises, secrets, and silence. Sheikh had paid his way through alliances with corrupt businessmen, covered up scandals with favors, and silenced adversaries with fear. He was known as the Cobra in the corridors of power, not because he struck fast, but because he smiled first. Loyalty to him meant survival. Betrayal meant erasure. And in all these years, he had never once looked back. Amarachi was a name he buried the moment his campaign manager warned him. Pregnancy scandals ruin presidents before they're even born. He had almost forgotten her face, until recently, when Damalola started asking strange questions. The boy had inherited his mother's softness and his father's fire, but Sheikh feared what softness could do. Love makes men weak, he believed. He had trained his son to be diplomatic, calculated, untouchable. But now Damalola was going around asking questions about the past, specifically about the Onitsha campaign days. Aides started whispering that he was digging too deep. Sheikh knew what that meant. Secrets were like landmines. Step too close, and they explode. He summoned Damalola to a private room and asked, "Why are you suddenly interested in slums and street girls?" Damalola didn't answer, just stared at him with haunted eyes and walked away. That night, Sheikh ordered his intelligence unit to trace any woman linked to Amarachi. They reported one possible name, Zecora, early 20s, living in extreme poverty, recently seen with Damalola. His hands clenched. A name he never wanted to hear again now echoed in the halls of power. But the worst part wasn't that Zecora existed. It was that her existence was inconvenient. If word got out that the president had a daughter on the streets, a daughter he abandoned while climbing his political ladder, it would shatter the image he built. Opponents would feed on it like vultures. Foreign media would devour it. So Sheikh did what he had always done. He plotted her disappearance. Quietly, discreetly. Find out what she knows. And if necessary, make her disappear, he told his aide, without blinking. To him, Zecora wasn't a daughter. She was a threat. What he didn't know, what no intelligence report could reveal, was that his own son had already brought her in from the rain. Damalola didn't sleep that night. He sat in his living room staring at the flickering candle on the table, his mind circling a single image, the necklace. The design had haunted him since childhood, two carved rivers swirling toward the center, meeting at a pair of stones set like twins. His mother had once shown him a nearly identical piece, and told him it was a gift his father had once received from a woman who changed our lives. As a child, he had thought little of it. But now, seeing Zecora wear the same design, the same rough carving, the same placement of stones, his chest tightened. Could it be her? Could she be connected to that mysterious woman? He remembered how his mother had once told him, "Your father was a different man before ambition." What had she meant? Had Zecora's mother been a part of that past he never dared explore? He looked toward the door where she now slept and felt a pull deeper than sympathy, something between guilt and awe, and more frighteningly, a memory trying to resurrect itself. He rose from the couch just before dawn and knocked softly on the guest room door. Zecora opened it slowly, already dressed in the same soaked wrapper, holding one of the babies on her hip. She looked tired but watchful. "You didn't sleep," she observed softly. Damalola nodded. "Neither did you," he replied. He offered her tea, which she declined. Then he pointed to her necklace. That pendant, where did you get it? She touched it instinctively, her fingers curling around it like a protective shell. My mother gave it to me, she said. She said it belonged to someone important. But she never explained. Damilola's breath caught. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a box. Inside was a faded photograph of his mother, pregnant, standing beside a younger version of the president. Around her neck, the same necklace. Zecora stared at it, stunned. That's my mother, she whispered, though the woman's face wasn't fully clear. That's your father? Damilola asked slowly, his voice trembling. Zecora shook her head. I don't know. My mother never told me his name. The weight of her words dropped like a stone into the silence between them. It was suddenly no longer about helping a stranger. This was history clawing its way out of the shadows. Damilola's mind raced. Why had his father kept this part of his life secret? Why had his mother never fully explained it? More importantly, what if Zecora was his sister? The possibility sent a cold shiver down his spine. He had felt something toward her, something tender, something protective. But now that feeling was twisted with fear. He looked at her again, not as a woman, but as a possible mirror of himself. Zecora was confused, but Damilola was terrified. Terrified of the truth, and of what it could mean for them both. That night, after she went back to her room, he opened his laptop and began the process of retrieving old photos, searching files, and whispering the only question that mattered. Who is she to me? Damilola's search took him into a digital maze of memories the world had long buried. Using secure access, he logged into restricted government archives. He wasn't just the president's son. He had clearance that most journalists would kill for. He typed in old campaign years keywords like Onitsha, Amarachi, and even scandal. Most results were scrubbed clean. It was as if Amarachi never existed. But the deeper he dug, the more fragments he unearthed. A faint mention in a local paper of a young schoolteacher who accused a rising politician of abandonment. A blurry photo of a protest that had been shut down within minutes. And then, like a ghost surfacing from a grave, he found it. An undelete image uploaded by an anonymous source. It showed Amarachi visibly pregnant, standing outside a small political rally, holding a placard that read, "He promised me forever, then erase me." Standing in the background, trying to avoid the camera, was his father, Chaik Uma. The photo nearly stopped Damilola's heart. There was no denying it. That was his father. And that was the same woman whose face Zecora now carried. His hands trembled as he printed the image and placed it beside the photo of his mother. The resemblance between Amarachi and Zecora was undeniable now, not just in appearance, but in the sorrow behind their eyes. Damilola's heart throbbed with anger. Why had his father done this? Why lie? Why erase her? His fingers clenched the photo, so tightly it crumpled. For a moment, the son in him wanted to confront Chaik Uma immediately, demand answers, force a reckoning. But the strategist in him knew better. His father wasn't a man who confessed easily. He would deny, manipulate, turn the story around. And if the truth became public, it could destabilize the entire presidency. No, Damilola would be careful. He would gather everything first. And he would protect Zecora at all costs. She couldn't find out the truth like this. Not yet. But fate has a way of accelerating pain. That evening, while Zecora was cleaning the baby bottles and humming softly to her children, Damilola left the room briefly to take a call. He stepped outside onto the balcony. "It's her," he told his most trusted friend in a hushed tone. "My father got her mother pregnant. The girl in my apartment, she's my sister." His voice cracked. "I don't know what to do. I can't let him destroy her again." What neither of them knew was that Zecora, hearing the baby stir, had opened the door quietly to check. She didn't catch all his words, but she heard the names. Her mother, pregnant, she's my sister. She stood frozen, gripping the wall, a rush of nausea climbing her throat. She backed away silently, her eyes wide with 1,000 questions. She didn't understand the whole truth yet, but she now knew one thing. Her pain had roots deeper than even she had imagined. The air inside the apartment turned heavy with silence. Damalola noticed the shift immediately when he returned. Zecora had grown quiet, not the cautious quiet she had carried since the beginning, but a disturbed silence, as if she had seen something she wasn't supposed to. She avoided his eyes, fed her babies with mechanical movements, and responded to his questions with clipped one-word answers. Damalola, distracted by the weight of his discoveries, tried not to push, but something inside him knew she had heard something. Later that night, after he laid on the couch pretending to sleep, he heard her sobbing through the walls, not loud sobs, but muffled ones, like someone trying not to wake their soul. He sat up slowly, his chest constricting. Had she heard his conversation? Did she already know? And worse, was he too late to shield her from this ugly truth? The next morning, Zecora confronted him, not with anger, but with calm devastation. "Who is my father, Damalola?" she asked, holding one twin close. Her voice was low, almost dead. He hesitated, panic rising in his throat. "Why do you ask?" he managed to whisper. "Because last night I heard you say something. Something that felt like an earthquake under my feet." Her hands trembled. "If you know who he is, I deserve to know too. Don't lie to me. I've lived too long in the dark." Damalola stared at her, every cell in his body torn. He couldn't lie to her, not after what she had endured. But how could he confirm it without breaking her completely? He pulled out the photograph, the one of her mother protesting, and handed it to her with shaking fingers. "Your mother, Amarachi. She once tried to fight for you. But he chose power over her, over you." Zecora stared at the image, her lips parting in disbelief. "That's him," she whispered. Damalola nodded slowly. "Yes, that's Sheikh Uma, the president of Nigeria. My father." Zecora collapsed onto the floor, her back pressed against the wall, the photo clenched in her hands. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Her tears were silent but endless. "All this time," she said through trembling lips, "while I begged on the streets, while I watched my mother die, my father lived in a palace?" The pain in her voice tore through Damalola like glass. "He knew about me?" she asked. "He erased you," Damalola said softly. "And I think he's still trying to erase you." Zecora let out a sound between a laugh and a sob. "Then why did you help me? Why did you bring me here?" Damalola moved closer, but didn't touch her. "Because I didn't know. And when I started to suspect, I still couldn't turn away. I'm sorry, Zecora. I'm so sorry." But no apology could undo what had been done. The truth had surfaced, and the scars of abandonment, poverty, and betrayal now burned brighter than ever. 26 years ago, when Amarachi first told Sheikh Uma she was pregnant, he had stared at her as if she were an inconvenience instead of the woman who once held his dreams in her palms. They were in a quiet compound outside Onitsha, where he was hiding from the political heat of a failed election. She had walked in smiling, wearing that pendant he gave her, the same one now around Zecora's neck. Her eyes sparkled with trust. "I'm going to be a mother," she said softly. "You're going to be a father." But Sheikh didn't smile. He didn't reach out. Instead, he leaned against the wall, silent for what felt like a lifetime, and then whispered, "You have to get rid of it." Amarachi's smile collapsed. "What?" she asked, thinking she misheard. "I can't have a child now," he continued. "Not when everything is so fragile. If they find out, the opposition will crucify me. I'll lose everything." Amarachi stepped back, her heart beating like a war drum. "But it's your child, Sheikh. Our child. I've stood by you. I've protected you." But he turned away, grabbed his coat, and muttered, "Then do one more thing for me. Disappear." Amarachi didn't disappear, not immediately. She followed him, begged, pleaded. For weeks, she showed up at his rallies, leaving notes at his office, praying he'd come around. When he stopped taking her calls, she resorted to showing up at events, always from a distance. One day, she saw him with another woman, wealthy, well-dressed, someone from a political family. Amarachi knew then that it wasn't just about power. It was about choosing a woman who could open doors. She had become a liability. When she finally confronted him at a private event, she begged for nothing but acknowledgement. Even if you don't love me anymore, even if I mean nothing, your child deserves your name, she cried. That was when he changed. His eyes hardened. He leaned into her ear and whispered, "If you ever say that again in public, I will make sure you vanish, and no one remembers you ever existed." Amarachi's tears froze. Her hands dropped. She walked away that night not just heartbroken, but hunted. And he kept his promise. By burying her name beneath media silence, political suppression, and fear. Back in the present, Damalola found this truth through an old diary, Amarachi's diary, kept safe by a woman who once shared a room with her during her last days. The woman, Mama Yellow, had kept it tucked inside a Bible under her bed. "She made me promise never to burn it," the woman said, handing it over. Said someone might need it one day. As Damalola read through the fading ink, tears welled in his eyes. The entries were filled with pain, confusion, and heartbreak. Amarachi had still held onto hope that Chike might change his mind, might someday want to meet his daughter. But her final entry said, "He's not a man. He's a machine built for the throne. I only hope Zecora never knows how much he cost me." Damalola closed the diary slowly and whispered to himself, "She has to know. She deserves the whole truth, even if it destroys him." Zecora stared at herself in the bathroom mirror, hands gripping the sink, her breathing shallow. The reflection looking back at her was a stranger, pale with shock, broken by truth. She had imagined many things about her past, even fantasized that her father might be a good man somewhere out there, maybe searching for her. But this was beyond anything she had prepared her heart for. The man who had let her mother die in poverty, who sat in presidential suites while she begged in the rain, wasn't just a monster in politics. He was her blood. The realization didn't spark anger immediately. It sparked numbness. A kind of hollow quiet that made her forget how to cry. Her babies were the only reminder that life was still moving forward. She picked them up, kissed their foreheads, and whispered, "Your grandfather doesn't deserve to know you." The words sounded bitter even to her ears. When she stepped back into the room, Damalola was pacing. He looked like a man being eaten alive from the inside. "Zecora," he began, but she held up her hand. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't apologize. It's not your fault." Her voice was too calm, too rehearsed. He approached slowly, his eyes red. "I didn't know. I swear to you, if I had known," she looked at him, and for the first time, not with gratitude, but with pain. "You're his son, and somehow the only person who showed me kindness in this entire world. What am I supposed to do with that?" Her voice cracked. "You gave me shelter. You fed my children. You made me believe I mattered. And now I find out we share blood." She turned away, shoulders shaking. "You should have let me rot in the rain. It would have hurt less than this." Damalola wanted to say 1,000 things, but none of them mattered anymore. All that mattered was the shattered woman in front of him and the truth that had destroyed whatever bond had been building between them. "I'm not like him," he whispered. "I promise you, I'll never be like him." Zecora didn't answer. She sat down, wrapped her arms around her babies, and said, "For a moment I felt seen. Now I feel erased all over again." Her words cut deeper than anything his father had ever said. Damalola knew then that no act of kindness could undo this hurt. And worse, he knew his father would do everything in his power to bury this scandal before it exploded. He looked at Zecora, the sister he never knew he had, and vowed silently, "I will protect you, even if it means losing everything." Back inside the presidential villa, Chike Uma was furious. Not because he felt guilt, but because he felt cornered. His son had grown distant, disobedient, unpredictable. The security reports confirmed Damalola had taken in a girl from the streets. His name had been seen on obscure digital archives, searching terms connected to Amarachi. The past was rising like smoke beneath the carpet he had buried it under. He summoned Damalola to his private chamber late at night, a room filled with polished marble, ancestral paintings, and the lingering odor of silent power. "I'll only ask this once," Chike said coldly. "Are you digging into something you shouldn't?" Damalola said nothing at first. He stood with his arms folded, eyes hard, and then said, "I found her. The girl your power tried to erase. She's your daughter, and you left her to die in the rain. Chaik's eyes narrowed. You don't know what you're talking about. Oh, I know more than enough, Damalola snapped. I know what you did to Amarachi. I read her diary. I saw the photos. I know you threatened her. And now you want to do the same to Zecora. The president rose from his chair slowly, his voice eerily calm. You have no idea what it takes to lead a nation. That girl was a risk. Amarachi was a storm I had to survive. If I had acknowledged her, I would have lost everything. I did what had to be done. Damalola clenched his jaw. And what now? You going to erase her again? Have her disappear? She's your daughter. Chaik's voice dropped to a dangerous tone. And you're my son. My legacy. Don't throw away everything I've built because of a moment of sentiment. Damalola stepped back in disgust. If this is the throne you built, then maybe it's not worth inheriting. Chaik stood in silence for a moment, then said, Stay away from her. That's not a request. If this goes public, we both lose. And she will suffer for it again. Damalola stared at him, eyes brimming with rage and grief. She's suffered enough. And if you touch her, I swear, father or not, I will burn everything you built to the ground. He stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. That night, the palace felt colder. Damalola returned to his apartment, where Zecora sat in silence, rocking her twins. He knelt before her, tears rolling down his face. We have to leave. He knows. And he'll come for you. But I won't let him win. Zecora didn't respond. She simply nodded. Because in that moment, she realized something that terrified her more than the president's threats. She was now in the center of a war she never asked for, but one she could no longer escape. The apartment felt smaller now. The walls whispered. Every time Zecora looked at her children's faces, she saw reflections of a man who had chosen status over blood. For 2 days, she said little to Damalola. She wasn't angry with him. She was angry at the world that allowed men like Chaik Uma to rise by stepping on women like Amarachi. As she fed the twins, her mind drifted through the storms her mother had endured, being ostracized, threatened, starved, and forgotten. All because a man feared what the truth could cost him. The deeper that realization sank in, the more Zecora understood that her mother had never truly died in sickness. She died in silence, buried by a country that revered the man who erased her. Zecora felt the urge to scream, but there was no one to hear her. Even now, with a brother by her side, she felt like an outsider. Her pain wasn't just personal anymore, it was political, woven into the throne her father still guarded. Damalola, on the other hand, had turned into a ghost of himself. He barely ate, barely slept. He couldn't look Zecora in the eyes without drowning in guilt. But he knew guilt wasn't enough. So he went digging. He reached out to an old political journalist, one who had retired after being blacklisted for trying to expose Chaik Uma's ties to foreign arms contracts. The man, called Babatiga, lived quietly in Ibadan now, surrounded by dusty files and bitter memories. When Damalola showed up, Tiga laughed. You want the truth? Son, your father buried the truth beneath the bones of those who carried it. Still, after some persuasion, he pulled out a folder, sealed copies of a suppression order against Amarachi's protest movement, signed by Chaik himself before becoming president. The file also included a list of witnesses who had disappeared or been paid off. They erased her so thoroughly, Tiga muttered, that even her ghost couldn't find its way home. Armed with the evidence, Damalola returned home and showed Zecora everything. She stared at the documents, her face blank. So this is it, she whispered. Proof that my mother's voice was stolen by the man whose blood runs in my veins. She turned away, clutching her necklace, the only thing her mother had left unbroken. I want to disappear, she said, her voice low. I want to leave this city, this country, this nightmare. Damalola stepped forward. No, that's what he wants. That's what they all want, for you to vanish, for your name to remain dust. But your mother tried to fight. Don't let her fight die with her. Zecora looked at him, eyes brimming. I'm tired of fighting, she whispered. But If I must, I want him to know what it cost me. I want him to see the daughter he tried to erase and know she remembers. The next morning, Damalola walked through the villa like a soldier carrying fire in his chest. Every hall, every smiling aide, every marble floor sickened him now. He saw his father's posters, bold slogans about justice and truth, and felt bile rise in his throat. At a press briefing, the media praised Sheikh Uma for his new child nutrition reform, unaware that his own grandsons had nearly died of hunger on the street. Damalola watched as his father smiled for the cameras, shook hands with foreign delegates, and posed with school children as if he hadn't ordered his intelligence team to make his own daughter disappear. The hypocrisy was unbearable. After the briefing, he followed his father into his private wing. "We need to talk," he said. His voice was calm but sharp. The guard stepped aside, and Sheikh turned slowly. "You're still chasing shadows?" he said coldly. Damalola stepped forward and placed the suppression order and witness list on the table between them. "I'm not chasing shadows. I'm chasing your truth." Sheikh stared at the documents, his face unreadable. "This was sealed," he muttered. "How did you buried her?" Damalola interrupted. "Buried my sister. Buried Amarachi. And for what? So you could shake hands with men who would stab you tomorrow." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then Sheikh sat down slowly, his voice low and deliberate. "You think this job is about morality? You think truth wins elections? I had to survive, dammy. The party gave me a choice, kill the scandal or lose the primaries. Amarachi was collateral damage." Damalola shook his head, rage threatening to break his voice. "She wasn't collateral. She was your child's mother. And Zecora? She's not a scandal. She's your daughter. And if you had even a thread of conscience, you'd step down right now." Sheikh looked up, the mask of a politician melting for a brief second. "If I fall, everything we built falls. The enemy's waiting at the gates. They'll burn this country just to see me bleed." Damalola stood there, watching the man who once taught him how to tie a tie now rationalize the destruction of lives for ambition. He realized something terrifying. His father no longer saw people, only strategies, only pawns. And he knew then that the man who raised him was no longer a father. He was a throne in human skin. "I'm going to protect her," Damalola said quietly. "And if I have to burn this house down to do it, I will." He walked out without another word. That evening, he returned to Zecora and sat across from her on the floor, their knees touching. "He doesn't see you," he whispered. "But I do. I don't care what it costs me anymore. We're going to take a DNA test. And when that truth comes out, he won't be able to deny you anymore, not even to himself." The clinic was quiet, hidden, private. Damalola had called in a favor from one of the country's top geneticists, a man who owed him more than one political life. Zecora sat stiffly in the waiting room, one baby asleep in her lap, the other fussing quietly in his blanket. The sterile walls felt too clean, too bright, too foreign. She had never stepped foot in a private clinic before. It felt wrong to be here, like an imposter. When the doctor called her name, she flinched. Damalola stood beside her, gently holding her elbow. "Just a swab," he whispered. 2 minutes. And then we'll know." She nodded, numb. The test was quick, clinical, impersonal. But the moment the cotton swab touched the inside of her cheek, a memory of her mother flashed. Amarachi crying in the rain, telling her, "Your father made me disappear." She clenched her fists. "Not anymore," she whispered. They left the clinic in silence. Zecora didn't ask when the results would be ready. She didn't want to know. She already felt like the truth was choking her. At home, she cleaned, bathed the twins, fed them mashed beans and pap with one hand while wiping her tears with the other. Damalola tried to speak several times, but always stopped. The air between them had shifted. They weren't two strangers helping each other anymore. They were family, but the kind of family stitched together by pain, not love. As night fell, the lights flickered from a passing thunderstorm. Zecora stood by the window and whispered a prayer, not for herself, but for her sons. "May you never have to beg to be seen," she said softly. "May you never carry the weight of a name that once erased your mother. 3 days later, the envelope arrived. Damalola held it in his hands as if it were made of fire. Zecora didn't move. She just stared at it. "Open it," she said. He hesitated. Then slowly, carefully, he tore the seal. His eyes scanned the page. Confirmation: 99.99% biological sibling match between Damalola Uma and Zecora Amarachi Okafor. Damalola closed his eyes, his chest collapsing inward. "It's true," he whispered. Zecora stared ahead, unmoving. "Say it," she said. "Say what it says." Damalola looked at her, eyes brimming. "You're my sister, Zecora. My blood. My family." She nodded slowly, as if her bones were digesting the truth. Then she broke, finally, into a sob so deep it shook the walls. Not because she didn't expect it, but because deep down she always knew. She just never wanted it to be true. Zecora couldn't sleep after the results. The room felt too bright, the silence too loud. For most of her life, the absence of her father had been an open wound, something she taught herself to ignore, like a limp in the soul. But now, knowing who he was, seeing his face on every news channel, hearing people praise his leadership, while she carried the memory of her mother's death in the slums, it made the truth unbearable. She had once dreamed of having a father, even just a name. She had prayed for him to knock on her door one day and say, "I'm sorry." But nothing in her fantasies prepared her for this reality. Not only did he abandon her, he made sure the world forgot she existed. She stood at the balcony that night, hugging her babies tightly as the wind cut across her skin. She was no longer just Zecora, the beggar, or Zecora, the girl in the rain. She was Zecora Uma, the president's daughter, and somehow that made her feel smaller, not larger. Damalola woke in the early hours to find her packing. He watched silently as she folded her wrappers, packed the baby's things into a second-hand duffel bag, and avoided his gaze. "You don't have to go," he said, voice hoarse. "Please." She paused for a long moment, then turned. "I do. This isn't my world. This apartment, this city, this name, it was never meant for me." Damalola moved closer, his chest aching. "You think I belong here? I've never belonged here. I've been pretending all my life. But then I met you, and for the first time, someone saw me, not my title." She blinked, jaw trembling. "But you're lucky. You still had an aim. You still had love. I had to create love from pain. My mother built a life out of scraps just to keep me alive. And now I'm supposed to sit here and pretend it's okay because I have a half-brother who means well." He stepped back as if slapped. "Zecora, I'm not asking for anything. I'm just asking you to stay safe." She hesitated, then nodded. "I won't vanish. But I won't hide anymore either." She looked down at her children. "I don't want them to grow up thinking silence is strength." Just as she turned to leave, a knock came at the door, urgent, sharp. Damalola moved to the peephole and froze. His father's security detail. "He knows we confirmed it," he whispered. "He's trying to get ahead of it." Zecora stiffened. "If he thinks I'll be silent again, he's mistaken." Damalola grabbed her hand. "We have to go. Now. I have another place. Hidden." She hesitated only a second before nodding. With babies in arms and a lifetime of wounds packed in silence, they slipped out the back door and into the darkness. And not a moment too soon. The agents entered the apartment minutes later, finding nothing but empty blankets, a warm crib, and a torn DNA envelope on the floor. The safe house was a tiny bungalow outside Abuja, owned by a retired Professor Damalola, once helped during a quiet corruption investigation. No one knew about it, not even the guards loyal to his father. It had no Wi-Fi, no television, only one small radio, a gas cooker, and an old mattress on the floor. But to Zecora, it felt like the safest place in the world. She spent the next 2 days in silence, tending to the babies, sorting her emotions into invisible drawers she could close one by one. But on the third morning, it hit her. As she fed her twins pap under the mango tree outside, a memory returned. Her mother lying on her deathbed, her voice weak but firm. "Don't ever beg to be loved, Zecora. Let your worth speak for itself." Zipporah had spent so many years surviving that she forgot what it meant to live. She stared down at her children and whispered, "We will not beg. Not anymore." Inside, Damilola stared at the radio as a press briefing played. The president's voice filled the air. "I deny all rumors that I have any illegitimate children. These are tactics by enemies to undermine this administration." Damilola's jaw clenched. He turned off. When Zipporah entered the room, he looked up, expression dark. "He's lying to the country. Again." Zipporah said nothing at first. Then she sat down beside him and handed him her mother's necklace. "Keep this," she said. "If I die tomorrow, let it remind you of what truth costs." Damilola took it slowly, his fingers shaking. "You're not going to die," he said. She gave a hollow laugh. "Then why does it feel like I've already been buried?" The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy with the weight of generations. Zipporah, who had lived invisible. Amarachi, who died unheard. And now Damilola, who was forced to choose between blood and power. That night, while Damilola was asleep, Zipporah crept outside with a notebook and began writing a letter to the man who forgot her. "Dear President Sheikh Uma," it began, "you once told my mother she didn't exist. I'm here to remind you that she did. She had a name, a voice, a child. That child grew up begging in gutters while you spoke of national honor. That child buried her mother with borrowed money while you shook hands with foreign presidents. That child is me." She poured her soul into the pages until the dawn light crept through the window. She didn't know what she'd do with it yet. But for the first time, she felt something stronger than pain, clarity. Her voice would no longer be silenced. Her presence would no longer be hidden. Whether or not the world believed her, she would speak. And this time, someone was going to listen. President Sheikh Uma sat alone in his private study, a glass of untouched whiskey beside him, the lights dimmed to shield his conscience. The silence gnawed at him. He had built his entire empire on control, of narratives, of scandals, of people. But this time, it had spiraled beyond his grip. His intelligence team had failed to locate Zipporah. The DNA test, leaked internally, had already reached the ears of a foreign journalist. Worse, whispers were spreading through diplomatic channels. Rumors of a loved child abandoned and a diary detailing political blackmail. He knew if the truth came out fully, it could fracture his image permanently. There were already murmurs in the party. Some ministers began to pull away. What scared him more than losing power was losing the story he had sold to the people, that he was a man of integrity, a man of vision. Now, the vision was bleeding. In desperation, Sheikh sent a message through Damilola. Not through anger, but through desperation. "Tell her," he said, "that I want to speak. Alone. No cameras. No guards. Just father and daughter." Damilola didn't trust it. But Zipporah, to everyone's shock, agreed. They met in an abandoned chapel near Oppo, neutral ground. No microphones, no politics. When Sheikh walked in, he looked older, smaller, like a man burdened by too many ghosts. Zipporah stood still, her babies in a basket beside her, her back straight. "You came," he said. She didn't answer. He sat in a pew across from her, resting his hands on his knees. "I was young," he began. "Ambitious. Stupid. But I wasn't evil." She stared. "You threatened her," she said. "You left her to die." Sheikh swallowed. "Because I was told, by party heads, foreign backers, that Amarachi would ruin everything. They promised me power, but only if I buried the past. I thought I could live with it. I was wrong." Zipporah's voice trembled. "So you traded us for power?" Sheikh looked away. "I traded my soul," he whispered. "And I've been searching for it ever since." He reached into his coat and pulled out a tiny box. Inside was a gold ring, old, faded. "I kept this from her. I was going to marry her before the party stepped in. I thought if I let her go quietly, she'd be safe. But I see now that silence was the greatest violence." Tears slipped from his eyes. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just need to know, can I still call you daughter?" Zipporah's jaw clenched. Her heart twisted. For so long, she had dreamed of this moment. Now it felt empty. She looked down at her sons. "You may be my father," she said, voice steady, "but you lost the right to call me daughter the day you erased my mother's name. I am Zecora Amarachi, and I carry her voice now." The day after the meeting in the chapel, Zecora returned to the safe house with her babies wrapped tightly against her chest. Her body was trembling, not from fear, but from the emotional weight of what had just happened. For years, she had dreamed of her father finally recognizing her, apologizing, embracing her. And now that he had knelt, now that he had cried, she had felt nothing but sorrow. Not satisfaction, not healing, just a widening emptiness. The damage was done. His tears couldn't rewind time, couldn't heal her mother's broken body, or return the years she had spent begging in the rain with twins on her back. She sat outside under the mango tree again, this time with a pen in her hand and a microphone connected to a recorder Damalola had set up. "This is my story," she said, pressing record. "Not for vengeance, but so no other woman is ever erased again." She didn't mention Chaik's name in the recording. Instead, she spoke of Amarachi, a teacher who fell in love, was abandoned, and died without justice. She told the story of a baby born into silence, raised in shadows, and brought into the light by suffering. "Some men climb ladders made of broken backs and never look down," she said. "But one day, the people they stepped on begin to speak. And when they do, no title can silence them." She ended the audio with a quote from her mother: "Never beg to be seen. Let your worth echo." Damalola uploaded it anonymously to a blog run by whistleblowers. Within hours, the recording was viral. Women's groups picked it up. Activists connected the dots. And while Zecora never named her father, the truth rippled loudly enough that even the palace gates couldn't shut out the echo. By evening, international media was asking questions. And in the heart of Aso Rock, Chaik Uma stood watching the storm he could no longer control. Later that night, the president called an emergency press meeting. His face was tired, his voice shaken. "In my youth, I made a decision," he began. "One that has haunted me for decades. A decision to choose power over people. In doing so, I wronged someone who gave me nothing but love. And I wronged the child we created. I let ambition replace humanity. I buried the truth, but I can't bury it anymore." Reporters gasped. Aides exchanged glances. "I cannot name her," he continued, "for she has asked for space. But I acknowledge her. I acknowledge my daughter, and the woman who gave me a future long before this country ever knew my name." The world was stunned. It was the first time a sitting Nigerian president had publicly admitted to concealing an illegitimate child. But the confession didn't cleanse him. It only exposed how much he had hidden. For Zecora, watching the broadcast from a borrowed laptop, the speech didn't matter. It came not from remorse, but from fear. And that, she knew, wasn't redemption. Zecora stood at her mother's graveside for the first time in years. The grave was unmarked, no headstone, just dry earth and a crumbling wooden cross. Her babies were asleep beside her in a woven carrier, and the sun pressed down gently, as if the sky itself was grieving. She knelt slowly, pulled a folded cloth from her bag, and laid it over the soil. On the cloth was a new nameplate, Amarachi Okafor, a voice they tried to silence. She dug a small patch of earth and planted her mother's favorite flower, orange hibiscus. Then she whispered, "They know your name now, Mama. They finally know." She sat in silence, letting the wind move through her braids, her fingers tracing the necklace around her neck, no longer hidden. Damalola sat a short distance away, watching but not speaking. He knew this was her moment, not his. His role was not to lead her anymore, but to stand behind her as she rose. In the weeks that followed, things changed. Quietly, but meaningfully. Zecora refused all interviews, declined all compensation, and turned down multiple speaking offers. She didn't want to be famous. She wanted to be free. With help from Damalola, she started a foundation in Amarachi's name, not for publicity, but to give scholarships to girls from slums who had been silenced like her. She lived modestly in a small apartment in Enugu, far from the flashing lights. But her story continued to ripple. Women began sharing their own stories of abandonment, of cover-ups, of political men who left bodies behind on their way to power. The public never forgot her name, even when she didn't ask them to remember. And every time someone whispered Zecora, it wasn't as the president's daughter, it was as Amarachi's child, the one who rose from rain, blood, and truth. As for President Sheikh Uma, he finished his term a broken man. He didn't run for re-election. His political allies distanced themselves. His legacy became a cautionary tale, not just about power, but about the cost of burying truth to build a throne. In his final public address, he spoke of dignity, of women, and of redemption, but most who listened did so with mixed feelings. He tried to visit Zecora one final time, but she refused. She didn't need closure from a man who had been a stranger all her life. Her healing had come not from his apology, but from owning her voice. On the final page of Amarachi's diary, Zecora added one sentence: "We were not lost. We were waiting to be found." And now, she was no longer the girl forgotten in the rain. She was the woman who made a nation remember her name. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel TOCHI Stories for more.